To be free, she escaped. Now the Count is desperate to know the baby she concealed. Lady Alara ran, her cloak whipping around her as her boots sank into the wet, uneven earth. The moon, full and pale, illuminated the jagged rocks, casting eerie shadows that twisted and stretched like living things. Somewhere behind her, the sound of pursuit was faint but relentless. She could feel it in her bones, the weight of eyes that never slept, of a presence that would not be denied. Alara had escaped the Count. She had left the grandeur of his castle, the oppressive halls lined with cold marble and shadows, and the whispers of servants who knew more than they spoke. She carried a secret, one that pulsed in her womb and in her heart, a child conceived in a time of fear, confusion, and a strange, undeniable connection to a man she both feared and could not forget. This child, fragile yet fierce, was the key to her freedom and the key to the Count's desperation. Her breaths came fast, each step a struggle against the fear that threatened to overtake her. The forest ahead promised cover but also uncertainty. The trees, ancient and tall, seemed to lean toward her, their branches scratching at her cloak as if warning her away. Yet she pressed forward. She had no choice. Freedom was worth every ache in her muscles, every prickle of fear. Alara's mind wandered to the Count, to the sharp line of his jaw, the way his dark eyes could pierce through pretense and pride alike. He was a man of power, one whose desire was a force as dangerous as any sword. She remembered the quiet moments that had haunted her dreams since her escape, the rare, soft smiles he gave when he thought no one was looking, the warmth that contradicted the coldness of his rule. And she remembered the cruelty too, the rigid control, the way he demanded obedience as if it were a law of nature. Shaking her head, she focused on the path ahead. She could not allow her thoughts to weaken her resolve. The child she carried depended on her strength. Every step into the forest felt like a small victory, a claim on her life that the Count could not touch. Night deepened. The wind howled through the trees, and the forest seemed to close around her. She stumbled over roots, skidded on slick leaves, and fought the panic rising in her chest. Then, as if answering her unspoken prayer for safety, she saw the faint glow of lantern light through the trees. It was a small village, one she had never known before, nestled in a hollow between the hills. Smoke rose from chimneys, curling into the night like silver threads. She approached cautiously, her heart pounding. There was no guard, no grand gate, just simple wooden houses, quiet streets, and the promise of refuge. A woman appeared at the doorway of one house, lantern in hand. She was older, with hair streaked by gray and eyes sharp with intelligence. "Who comes at this hour?" the woman asked, voice firm but not unkind. Alara bowed slightly. "I am lost. I need shelter, please." The woman studied her for a long moment. Something in her eyes softened, a recognition of need, perhaps even danger. "Come inside, then," she said finally, stepping aside. "But speak only what you must. The world is not kind to those who are hunted." Alara entered the house and warmth enveloped her. The smell of bread and herbs, the quiet crackle of fire, and the simple furnishings felt like a small miracle. She sank into a chair, her legs trembling. The woman placed a bowl of stew before her, and Alara ate without speaking, tasting safety for the first time in days. "You are not from here," the woman said gently, "and you carry more than just your own burdens, I can see it." Alara froze, her hand instinctively resting over her belly. I am careful," she said softly. "No one must know." The woman nodded knowingly. "Good. Secrets are both shield and sword, but you will need allies. Even in the shadows, the world moves and danger finds its way." For the first time in days, Alara allowed herself to relax, even a little. She spoke of her flight only in fragments, careful to omit the details that might draw attention. The woman listened, her eyes thoughtful, and finally said, "You can stay, for now, but you must learn the ways of this place. The forest is alive and it watches those who wander." Alara nodded, gratitude and fear warring in her chest. She had escaped the Count, but she knew instinctively that he would not let her go so easily. Somewhere in the darkness, he was searching, relentless, driven by a desire that could not be denied. That night sleep came fitfully. Dreams were haunted by the Count's voice, the echo of his commands, the soft, dangerous laughter that had once drawn her to him. And then a new voice, small and delicate, made itself known, the life within her. She woke, hands trembling, feeling both the burden and the miracle of the child she carried. Morning brought the first light of hope. The village was quiet, its people hidden in the warmth of their homes. Alara walked through the streets, careful to remain unseen, yet every shadow seemed to hold a watchful eye. She learned quickly. The villagers were kind but wary, their knowledge of magic and danger subtle but real. They spoke in whispers of spirits in the forest, of unseen eyes, and of power that could be awakened if one listened carefully. Alara began to understand. To survive here, she could not rely solely on speed or cunning. She would need strength of a different kind, knowledge, patience, and a connection to the world around her. The forest was not merely a hiding place, it was a teacher, and she would learn its lessons if she hoped to protect her child. Days passed. Alara trained herself, moving quietly through the woods, learning to sense the subtle changes in the wind, the movement of animals, the patterns of the stars. She felt the pulse of life in the trees, in the earth, and in herself. And all the while, the memory of the Count lingered, a shadow in her heart that neither time nor distance could erase. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in streaks of crimson and violet, a figure appeared at the edge of the forest. Alara froze, heart pounding. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, with a presence that seemed to pull the air from her lungs. "You cannot hide what belongs to me," a voice said, low and dangerous. It was the Count. His eyes, dark and penetrating, locked onto hers across the distance. The wind carried his words, sharp as a knife, but beneath the threat was something else, a tension that made her chest ache with remembered longing. Alara wanted to run, but the child inside her seemed to still her limbs. Fear and longing battled within her, fierce and unrelenting. She realized with a jolt of both terror and wonder that the Count would not relent. Her flight had not ended the story, it had only begun a new chapter. As night fell, the village lights glimmered like stars scattered on the earth. Alara returned to the small house that had become her refuge. The woman who had taken her and watched her quietly, understanding more than Alara could say. "He is coming," she murmured, "and he will bring more than desire with him. He will bring a choice." Alara sat by the fire, hands on her belly, feeling the life she had sworn to protect. She thought of freedom, of the future she had fought so hard to claim. And yet, she could not deny the pull of the Count, the complexity of the emotions that tied them together. Love, fear, obsession, and hope, all tangled in a web that stretched between them, invisible but unbreakable. The night deepened. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song through the trees. Somewhere in the darkness, the Count waited, patient and relentless. And inside, Alara made a vow. She would protect her child, claim her freedom, and face the man who haunted her heart, whatever the cost. For in this world of shadows and secrets, of power and desire, there was one truth that could not be denied. Some bonds could not be broken, even by fear, even by flight. And as she drifted into uneasy sleep, the forest whispered around her, carrying a single, haunting promise. He comes, and the story is not yet done. The sun had barely risen when the first sound of distant hooves reached the village. Alara's sharp ears caught it before her eyes could, a rhythmic pounding that stirred her blood and tightened her chest. She rose from her small wooden bed, her hand resting instinctively on her belly. The child inside her seemed to stir, sensing the tension she could not yet name. The woman who had taken her in, Mara, wise and patient, stood in the doorway, her face calm but her eyes alert. "He has found the trail," Mara said softly, almost as if speaking it aloud could make it vanish. The Count will not give up. He never does. Alara swallowed hard. The forest, her sanctuary, suddenly felt small, vulnerable. She had hoped that the miles she had gained, the hours and days of hiding would be enough. Yet the Count's reach was long and his determination unmatched. He will not harm the child, Alara whispered to herself, though her voice trembled. I will not let him, Mara nodded. He seeks more than the child. He seeks your heart, your will, the bond that ties you both. You must be ready for that. Alara wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders and stepped outside. The village was quiet, the early morning mist clinging to the earth like a soft veil. She moved cautiously, eyes scanning the trees and paths, trying to sense the approach of danger. The forest had taught her many lessons: to listen to the wind, to feel the movements of the earth, to sense the life around her. Today, all those lessons would be tested. By midday, the sounds grew closer. Horses' hooves struck the soft ground with growing urgency. Shadows moved between the trees and Alara's pulse quickened. She remembered the Count from the last night, standing at the edge of the forest, his dark eyes searching for her, speaking words that chilled and intrigued her at once. You cannot hide what belongs to me. She knew now that it was true. The child, her freedom, the fragile thread of her heart, all of it was bound to him in ways she could neither sever nor fully understand. Hours later, he appeared. Count Dorian rode through the forest with a quiet command that seemed to bend the trees to his presence. His cloak flowed behind him like a shadow, and his dark eyes searched every corner, every movement, every hint of life. He moved with patience, a predator who understood that force was not always the answer. Sometimes, the hunt required subtlety, observation, and time. When Alara caught sight of him from a distance, her heart clenched. She had imagined this moment countless times, what she would say, how she would run, how she would fight. But nothing could prepare her for the reality of seeing him so close, alive, breathing, and yet untouchable. He spoke her name, low and deliberate. Alara. The sound of it made her stomach twist, a mixture of fear, longing, and something she refused to name. She moved deeper into the forest, careful to stay hidden. Each step was measured, each breath controlled, but the presence of the Count behind her was almost palpable. It pressed against her skin, brushed against her thoughts, and whispered that no matter how far she ran, the bond between them could not be broken. By nightfall, she reached a secluded grove. The trees were tall and old, their branches forming a natural canopy that hid the sky. A small stream ran through the center, its water clear and cold. She knelt by it, washing her face and hands and listening. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every distant animal call set her nerves on edge. She thought of the Count, his relentless pursuit, his dark charm. And she thought of the child, safe within her, fragile and miraculous. The child represented a future she could not yet fully imagine, a future she would protect at all costs. Suddenly, the air shifted. The wind carried a whisper, subtle yet distinct. Alara's breath caught. She turned slowly, and there he was, stepping into the clearing. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, the intensity of his eyes, the quiet strength that had once drawn her so close. You cannot keep running, he said, voice low but firm. Not from me. Not from what is ours. Alara's heart pounded. She wanted to flee, to disappear into the shadows of the trees, but her legs trembled. She realized something she had refused to admit. She was drawn to him, as much as she feared him, as much as she resented his relentless pursuit. I do not belong to you, she said, voice trembling but determined, and neither does my child. He stepped closer, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. No, he said softly, almost gently, you belong to yourself. But the bond between us, it is stronger than any choice, stronger than fear. It is part of who you are and part of who I am. Alara wanted to hate him, to reject him, but she felt the truth of his words, cold and undeniable. The tension between them was a force, pressing, insistent, unyielding, yet she could not allow it to control her. She turned away, moving toward the shadows of the grove. Do you not see, he said, following her. Running changes nothing. You cannot hide from what is already part of you, from what is already ours. Her mind swirled with memories, moments of anger, moments of tenderness, moments where she had glimpsed the man behind the Count's power, a man capable of love, of care, of danger tempered by patience. She shook her head, fighting the pull. I will protect my child, she said. That is all that matters. I will not let you or anyone take that from me. He stopped and watched her, his gaze intense but not cruel. And I will protect the child too, he said quietly. Even if it means standing apart, even if it means waiting until you are ready to trust me. Alara paused, her hands resting over her belly. She felt the child stir, as if recognizing the truth in his words, sensing the man's promise, the potential for protection, and the lingering danger. The moment was heavy, a mixture of fear, longing, and cautious hope. For the next several days, the Count remained nearby, never pressing too close, never crossing the boundaries she set, yet always present. He understood the rules of pursuit, the dance of power, and the balance of fear and desire. Every night, Alara would hear the soft echoes of his presence in the forest, a shadow moving, a distant voice, a sense of being watched that never threatened but never left her alone. During this time, Alara learned more about the forest and the village. She discovered small clearings where herbs grew in abundance, streams with water so pure it healed minor cuts and weariness, and trees whose roots and branches formed natural pathways that only someone attentive could follow. She trained her senses, becoming more aware of sounds, scents, and subtle movements. She was no longer just a woman fleeing. She was a mother determined to protect her child, a survivor learning to navigate the shadows. Yet in the quiet moments, she allowed herself to think of Dorian. She thought of the complexity of the man who pursued her, not merely a tyrant or a hunter, but someone shaped by power, ambition, and perhaps regret. And she realized, reluctantly, that her own heart carried pieces of him that she could not discard, no matter how fiercely she fought against them. One night, as the moon rose full and bright, Alara sat by the stream, hands gently resting over her child. The water reflected the silver light, shimmering like a mirror of stars. She felt a presence behind her and did not turn immediately. Her instincts told her to be wary, yet part of her longed for him to step into the light, to speak, to acknowledge the unspoken connection between them. He came, silently, as he always did. You have grown stronger, he said, his voice a soft rumble that carried both pride and concern. And your child will be strong too, I see it. Alara's eyes met his, and for a moment the forest seemed to pause, holding its breath along with her. Strength alone is not enough, she said quietly. There are dangers you cannot see. There are choices I must make alone. Dorian nodded. I know, and I will wait. I will protect what is yours even if you cannot yet trust me fully. But understand this, your flight has not broken the bond between us. It has only made it more complicated, more vital. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the weight of their shared history, the tension of unspoken emotions, and the promise of challenges yet to come. Alara felt the stirrings of hope and fear intertwined, each impossible to separate from the other. Tomorrow, he said finally, turning toward the shadows, we will face the choice that awaits us. But tonight, know that you are not alone. Alara watched him disappear into the darkness, heart heavy yet strangely light. The Count's pursuit was relentless, but she had learned that freedom was not merely distance. Freedom was strength, knowledge, and the courage to face whatever came next. As the stars shimmered overhead and the stream whispered in the quiet night, Alara made a vow once more. She would protect her child, face the Count when the time was right, and claim a future shaped by her own will. The forest seemed to murmur its approval, ancient and eternal. And somewhere in the shadows, the Count waited, patient, powerful, and desperate to know the child she had concealed. The story was far from over. The forest was still that night, heavy with mist and the scent of rain. Moonlight filtered through the branches, silvering the leaves and casting strange, dancing shadows. Alara moved cautiously, every sense alert, feeling the pulse of the forest and the quiet beat of her own heart. She had learned much since fleeing the Count about the land, about herself, and about the power that stirred quietly within her child. Yet tonight, a tension lay in the air that was unlike anything she had felt before. Something was coming, something inevitable. The wind whispered warnings she could not ignore. The child within her shifted, small fists pressing against her, as if aware that the night would bring more than danger. She had reached a clearing near the ruins of an ancient stone temple, a place where the earth itself hummed with unseen energy. Here, the trees were sparse, and the moonlight bathed the broken columns in a pale, ethereal glow. Alara had chosen this place deliberately. If the Count came, she would be ready. She waited, and she did not have to wait long. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping silently onto the moss-covered stones. Dorian. His cloak flowed like dark water, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. The forest seemed to acknowledge him, bending slightly in his presence, and Alara felt the familiar shiver of fear and longing stir in her chest. "You came," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "I did," he replied, voice low but clear. "I could not remain distant any longer, not from you." Not from him. His gaze shifted to her belly, and a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes, wonder, concern, desire, perhaps all three. "You will not harm my child," Alara said, stepping forward slightly, placing herself between the ruins and him. "You will not take him, or her, or whatever this child is meant to be." Dorian raised his hand slowly, as if to show he meant no immediate threat. "I have no intention of taking anything from you, but I must see, must know. The child is part of me as much as you, whether you accept it or not. The bond exists and it cannot be denied." Alara shook her head. "It is not your right to demand it, not now, perhaps never." A tense silence followed, filled only by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. Both of them, hunter and hunted in different ways, felt the weight of unspoken truths. Dorian's presence was magnetic and overwhelming, yet Alara's defiance burned brightly, refusing to be subdued. Then, as if the night itself responded to their emotions, the ground beneath them trembled. A soft glow began to emanate from Alara's belly, small at first, then growing stronger, illuminating her and the Count with an otherworldly light. The child was stirring, its powers awakening, fragile and yet immense. Dorian's eyes widened, not with fear but with awe. "It begins," he whispered, stepping closer, drawn not just by obligation but by something deeper, something impossible to resist. Alara stepped back instinctively, shielding the light, protecting the child. "I do not know what it is yet," she said, her voice shaking. "I do not know if it will bring danger or hope, but I will not let it be taken from me." "You will not have to," Dorian said softly. "We must learn together, control it, guide it, protect it. I can help you, but you cannot do it alone." Her heart twisted. His words were meant to reassure, yet they carried a weight she could not dismiss. She wanted to trust him, to accept that he might help, but every instinct screamed caution. Every step he took reminded her of the nights spent under his command, the sharp edge of his temper, the power he wielded like a blade. And yet, she could not deny that she needed him, needed his knowledge, his strength, his presence. The bond between them, complicated and painful, was undeniable. The ground shook again, stronger this time. Alara instinctively clutched her belly, feeling the child respond violently. Light pulsed, a rhythmic glow that seemed to sync with the beating of her heart. Dorian dropped to one knee, placing a hand lightly on the earth, eyes closed as he murmured words in a language she did not understand. The air thickened, charged with energy, and the shadows around them stretched and writhed. Trees bent slightly toward the clearing, leaves trembling. The ruins seemed alive, ancient stones humming in response to the child's awakening. "Ilara," Dorian said, opening his eyes, now glowing faintly with the reflected light. "You must trust me. We must focus together. Fear will not protect you. Control will." Ilara hesitated, breathing hard. She knew he was right, and yet her pride, her need to protect, burned inside her. Slowly, cautiously, she reached out her hands. The light pulsed stronger, as if sensing the tentative bridge forming between them. For a long moment, they simply stood together in silence, connected by the glow, the pulse, and the overwhelming weight of emotion. She felt the truth of his words. The bond existed, undeniable and powerful, yet fragile. It required care, understanding, and surrender, none of which came easily. And then, without warning, a wave of energy burst outward. The ruins trembled, stones shifting, and a distant cry echoed through the forest. The child's power was raw, unshaped, and frightening in its intensity. Ilara clutched her belly, gasping, as Dorian moved instinctively to shield her. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice firm and calm despite the chaos around them. "It will grow, and we must face it together. Do you understand?" Ilara nodded, though her hands shook. "I understand, but I am afraid." "You should be," he admitted. "Fear is natural. But we cannot let it rule us." The light subsided slowly, leaving the clearing bathed in a soft, lingering glow. Both of them were breathless, sweat and tension mingling with the remnants of awe. The child had revealed a glimpse of its potential, a glimpse that promised both wonder and danger. They looked at each other then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. A recognition of shared responsibility, shared fear, and shared possibility. The tension between them, fierce and complicated, softened slightly under the weight of reality. They were bound together now, not by desire alone, but by necessity, by the fragile, luminous life that depended on both of them. "Ilara," Dorian said quietly, stepping closer, though not crossing her boundaries. "Whatever comes, we face it as one. Not as hunter and hunted, not as prisoner and pursuer, but as partners. You and I for the child, for ourselves." She studied him, heart pounding. The emotions were raw: fear, anger, longing, and a tentative hope. Could she trust him fully? Could she allow herself to accept that he might not just be a threat but a protector? She wanted to deny it, resist it, fight it, yet she could not. I will try," she said, her voice soft but determined. "For the child, but I will not forget, I will not forgive everything yet." "You need not," he said, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. "Trust must be earned. We will take it one step at a time." The forest seemed to exhale, the tension easing, yet not fully gone. The night carried a new weight, one of possibility, of danger, and of choices that could not be avoided. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, Ilara felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She had faced the Count, confronted the reality of their connection, and seen the potential of the child's power. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with risk, yet she felt a small, growing certainty within her. She would not run, not anymore. But the forest whispered warnings even in the morning light. Somewhere beyond the trees, shadows stirred, and the world was not yet ready for the power that had been awakened. Ilara knew the true trials were only beginning, trials that would test her strength, her resolve, and the bond she had reluctantly formed with the man who had haunted her heart for so long. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried a voice, familiar and commanding. "The game has begun, and there is no turning back." Ilara placed a hand on her belly, feeling the small, bright pulse of life within her. She whispered softly, "We will survive, we will endure, and we will claim our freedom together or apart, but never broken." The forest seemed to answer in kind, rustling leaves, creaking branches, and the faint shimmer of lingering light on the stones. The story was far from over, and the collision of shadows, hearts, and destinies was only beginning. The first light of dawn seeped through the mist, casting a pale gold over the forest. Ilara stood at the edge of the clearing near the ancient ruins, her hands resting protectively over her belly. The night had been restless, the wind carrying warnings and whispers of challenges to come. But the day was calm, deceptive in its serenity. She knew it would not last. Beside her, Dorian adjusted his cloak, his dark eyes scanning the forest. He was quiet, thoughtful, and for the first time fully aware of the weight of responsibility that lay upon him. The child they had both begun to accept as part of their lives was awakening further, its power unformed yet immense, and the forces of the world, both natural and supernatural, had begun to stir in response. "Are you ready?" he asked, voice low. Alara turned to him, her face determined but tired. "As ready as I can be, but fear does not leave entirely. I can feel it in the air, in the stones, in the life inside me." "Good," Dorian said softly. "Fear keeps us sharp. It keeps us alive, but it must not rule us. Together we control it, not the other way around." They moved into the ruins, the ground trembling slightly beneath their feet. The ancient stones seemed to pulse with energy, attuned to the child's growing power. Alara felt it in every step, a strange, luminous vibration that ran through the earth and up her legs. She clutched her belly instinctively, feeling the child respond to the magic that surrounded them. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the ruins, carrying with it a whisper of voices, old and mournful. Shadows flickered between the broken columns, moving as if alive, reaching for them. Dorian drew a deep breath. "Stay close," he said, taking her hand. She felt the warmth of his grip, steady and reassuring, and the tension inside her eased slightly. The shadows shifted, coalescing into shapes, twisted forms of darkness, remnants of ancient magic that had lingered in the ruins for centuries. They advanced slowly, testing, probing. Alara's pulse raced, but she did not run. She stood firm, trusting in Dorian's presence and the connection they shared. "Together," he whispered, almost a vow. "Do not fight alone." Alara nodded. The first shadow lunged, striking with a force that threatened to unbalance her. She cried out, but Dorian was there instantly, intercepting the blow, his hands guiding hers. The energy of the child pulsed, a brilliant light that pushed the darkness back. The shadows hissed and recoiled, and Alara realized that their power was not only defensive but also a bond between her, Dorian, and the child. Hours passed, though time seemed warped inside the ruins. The shadows attacked and retreated, testing, probing, seeking weakness. Each time, the light from her child flared, stronger and brighter, repelling the darkness. And with each moment, Alara felt herself grow, not just in courage, but in understanding. She could feel the magic in the air and the stones, and in Dorian's calm, guiding presence. By the time the sun reached its peak, the shadows had begun to retreat, drawn back into the deeper corners of the ruins. The forest itself seemed to exhale, releasing tension that had built over centuries. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but alive, feeling the warmth of Dorian's hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible," he said softly. "The child, your bond with it, is unlike anything I have ever seen. It will grow strong, as will you." She looked at him, sweat and dirt on her face, eyes bright with both relief and lingering fear. "It was not just me, it was us. You were there, you guided me. You did not command me or control me. You helped me." Dorian's gaze softened. "I do not wish to control you, Alara. Only to be part of what we share. Not for power, not for possession, but for protection, for hope." Alara felt her chest tighten, emotions flooding her. She wanted to deny the longing she felt, wanted to push away the pull that had haunted her for months, but she could not. She saw it reflected in Dorian's eyes, the same complex mix of fear, desire, and the need for redemption. I do not know if I can trust entirely," she admitted, voice small. "But I see that you mean to try, and that counts for something." "Trust is earned," he said quietly, "and I am willing to earn it step by step, no matter how long it takes." A calm settled over them, fragile but real. The air was lighter, the shadows held at bay, and the child within Alara shifted gently, as if sensing the truce forming between its parents. She placed her hands over her belly, feeling a warmth that was more than just life, it was promise. The forest whispered around them, ancient and watchful, acknowledging the moment of fragile peace. But even in that quiet, Alara knew the world outside the ruins would not remain still. Danger would come again, and they would have to face it together. "Are we safe now?" she asked, voice almost a whisper. "As safe as the world allows," Dorian replied. "But safety is not the goal, survival is, and we have survived together, that is the beginning." The words settled in her heart. For months she had run, hid, feared, and fought. And now, for the first time, she felt a cautious hope. Hope that they could face the darkness together. Hope that the child would grow in a world shaped not only by fear, but by love and protection. They spent the remainder of the day preparing. Dorian helped fortify the ruins with wards and subtle magic, learned from the ancient stones and his own knowledge. Alara gathered herbs, strengthened her connection with the forest, and practiced focusing the child's growing power. Each task, though small, reinforced their bond, teaching them trust and patience. By evening, exhaustion pressed upon them and they rested beneath the ruins' tallest columns. The child stirred softly, and Alara felt the pulse of life, fragile and strong at once. Dorian sat beside her, close but respectful, offering quiet comfort. They spoke little, sharing only presence and warmth, allowing the silence to speak for what words could not. "Do you think we will be able to face the world?" Alara asked finally, eyes on the soft glow of the stones. "We will," Dorian said firmly. "We must, not for ourselves alone, but for what comes next. The child will grow, and with it, the hope for a future that is not ruled by shadows." Her heart ached at the truth in his words. The world had been cruel, powerful, and unforgiving. But in this place, in this moment, there was a possibility of redemption for both of them and for the life they protected. Night fell, and the ruins glimmered under the moonlight. The forest hummed with quiet energy, no longer threatening but alive with watchful presence. Alara placed her hands over her belly, whispering softly, "We will be strong, we will be free, and we will survive." Dorian, sensing the depth of her resolve, reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Together," he said, voice filled with certainty and promise. "No matter what comes, we face it together." Alara looked into his eyes, seeing the man he had become, not the count who had pursued her, but the man capable of love, patience, and courage. A faint smile touched her lips, tentative but real. "Together," she echoed. The wind carried the whisper of the forest, the echo of ancient stones, and the soft stirring of a new life. The child within her shifted, responding to the bond forming between its parents. The ruins seemed to pulse with possibility, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could grow. As dawn broke fully, spilling golden light across the trees and stones, Alara and Dorian stood together, hands joined, hearts still cautious but no longer divided. The shadows of the past had not vanished entirely, but they no longer ruled the present. The child would grow, and with it, a future shaped by courage, love, and redemption. Alara breathed deeply, the forest alive around her, the warmth of Dorian's hand steady at her side. She had run, she had fought, she had feared. But now, for the first time, she understood that true strength was not in fleeing or hiding. It was in facing the darkness together and allowing hope to guide them forward. And so, beneath the ruins and the rising sun, the first chapter of a new life began. Shadows still lingered in corners, but they no longer had the power to divide hearts, to dictate choices, or to extinguish the fragile light of what was growing within Alara. The world was wide, dangerous, and uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Alara felt the possibility of freedom not just for herself, but for the child, for the count, and for the bond they now shared. And in that quiet, golden moment she knew they would endure. They would survive, and together they would rise.